Have you ever been back to a place from your childhood and found it almost totally changed or unrecognizable to how you remember it? If you have, then you know the feeling of the song Kaze Wo Atsumete, Gather Up the Wind. Possibly the defining song from the defining band from Japanese pop rock lyric writing history. So where did the song come from? That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to do a deep dive. If this is of interest, please subscribe and let's get into it. Lyrically, Kaze Wo Atsumete evokes a fantastic, otherworldly cityscape. It's a place where there's sheens of kind of stained smog, which is at once dirty but beautiful. It's a place where streetcars are seen in the distance, sort of almost as if they're floating across the ocean. It's a place where there's skyscrapers that are wearing robes that rustle in the breeze. It's a city that floats at its moorings as if it's a ship. The lyrics were written by Takashi Matsumoto, and they come from an album, Kazemachi Roman, which translates as the City of Wind, the Romance of the City of Wind. And this is an album that really changed Japanese pop rock music forever, especially lyrically. The City of the Wind in this case is Tokyo of the mid-1960s, around the time of the 1964 Olympics, and it looks at the Tokyo before the Olympics and after the Olympics. So it's Tokyo at a very specific time, but also it's not Tokyo at all in another way. It's kind of like a remembrance of Tokyo, or an echo of Tokyo, a mirage, a kind of reverberation, or if you want to put it in a Japanese way, perhaps like a floating world. So when Matsumoto was asked about the term Kazemachi Roman, Kazemachi, Wind City, and where that came from, he said, "The Olympics happened in 1964, and the house I had been living in made way for a road. The cityscape I had come to know and love suddenly disappeared. But you know, when you're dreaming or when you close your eyes, you can see the city you lived in as a child. That city of memory I call the Kazemachi, the city of wind. This city of memory can't be seen with the naked eye. It can only be seen with the mind's eye." And I thought, that's just like the wind. Now I think that more than the city that actually exists, it's the city of my memory that I need to hold most dear. I felt like that ever since I was at elementary school. So you can see the song is imbued with a sense of nostalgia and like a love-hate relationship with Tokyo, which Matsumoto has said that he has, where on the one hand it's his city, it's the place he remembers from his youth, but it's not as well, it's changed. Now the idea of wind features in a lot of Matsumoto's work, and of course in this song, Kaze Wo Atsumete, Gather Up the Wind, and the album Kazemachi Roman, the City of Wind, the Romance of the City of the Wind. And when he was asked about what does wind mean to him and why does he use it so much, he replied, "One thing about wind is that it is something that can't be seen. For human beings, it is always the things that can't be seen that are the most important. Love, wind, justice, God, these are things that can't be seen. And it's these important things that can't be seen that I've always been drawn to from a young age. I feel like the things that can be seen aren't what it's really all about. You know, money, status, these are things that you can see. And it's not just that wind can't be seen, it's also that it moves. I feel like there's something universal there. For example, wind blows across national borders, and these fair wind blows without discrimination, and they are something to be reckoned with when they become violent. Within the things that can be seen, water also has similar qualities of movement, but it's more the wind that has always captured my heart. Also, when animals sense danger, it is often through smelling things in the breeze. And what we now call information is also part of wind. So you can see that the concept of wind has a strong meaning to Matsumoto, and that's why he gave this name Kazemachi to his city of memories, the city that exists only in the wind. And this is sort of a concept that can be seen through a lot of Japanese art, and there's actually a word for it called心象風景, and fuke means scenery, and if you look at the word fuke itself, it's composed of the characters of wind. You can see this concept in other visual art. It's mostly associated with visual art, but you can see it in poetry and Japanese literature and this song. Takashi Matsumoto himself was renowned for being kind of bookish. So the story goes that Haruomi Hosono, who sings the song, saw Matsumoto carrying around his books and said to him, well, if you're reading books, then you can write lyrics. You go and write the lyrics. And that's how he became a lyricist. He went on to write lyrics for lots of idol type, real mainstream Japanese singers. He had a career as a lyricist. And the lyrics for Kaze Wo Atsumete come from a very poetic place, the toilet. Or not so much the toilet itself, but some writing that Matsumoto saw up on the toilet in a cafe that actually gets mentioned in the song. And it was this poetry from 20th century poet Fuyue Anzai. And the poem read, Tefu tefu ga ippiki dattan kaikyo o watatte itta. And this roughly translates as a single butterfly flew out across the Tartary Strait. And it's a poem that's expressed by the poet looking out at the Japanese motherland, gazing across the ocean from the perspective of Japanese-occupied China in the pre-war period, and seeing a butterfly flying out, using an old word, tefu tefu, which means butterfly. In terms of the recording of the song, apparently the song wasn't really finished at all on the day of the recording. So the music was written by Haruomi Hosono, and apparently Hosono came to the studio and he just invited Matsumoto along. He hadn't invited the rest of the band, so it was just the two of them there. And Hosono kind of leant against the wall and crouched down with one knee up and played him sort of what he had of the song. And Matsumoto's like, well, this is pretty brave that we're scheduled to record right now and he's still kind of writing the song. And apparently it was very hard to match Matsumoto's words to a melody because they're quite poetic and quite involved. So they did a take, just the two of them. First it was guitar and drums, and then Hosono went back and he did overdubs of the vocals, and he apparently did it sort of bit by bit, sort of punching in and punching out. So he says that in interviews that now he can't even really sing it himself, and he says that there's kind of mistakes in there in the melody where he actually goes down to a different note to what he was intending to, but that's sort of left in because it was all done on the fly. He said in an interview he finds it interesting that when he listens to people's covers, because they're doing it just how he sang it, but they're singing his mistakes. And Matsumoto in an interview has called the song the kind of chance fluke song of the century, that just something they threw together very quickly at the end, but has become this their most iconic song. So why is this song so enduring, and why has it been used in films like Lost in Translation and sort of taken off around the world, especially considering that Happy End were a band that sort of lasted 3 years and never really had any hits. This album, Kazemachi Roman, sold less than 10,000 copies at the time. It wasn't like it was a big hit. Well, for one thing, the song represents sort of the high point of this whole movement that came out of a debate that was happening in 1970s Japan about whether you should be able to sing folk rock music in Japanese or whether it had to be English. And this debate is called in Japanese Nihongo rock lonso, which is Japanese English debate or controversy. And it was kind of this debate that played out in the media, in the written media, between Yuya Uchida, who was like a stalwart music scene they kind of called him the boss. And the other person was Matsumoto, the person writing the lyrics for Happy End, who was sort of reluctantly drawn into this kind of dialogue as a 20-year-old person that was, not big on confidence, newly coming into the world of music. Looking back on this, debate, which some people argue is sort of blown out of proportion, that it wasn't, it was a bit of a media beat-up, but Matsumoto, looking back on that, has said, at the time people said, Japanese rock is impossible, you have to sing in English. And these people made up around 80 to 90% of the population. If you made rock music with Japanese lyrics, you would be laughed at. And prior to Happy End's forming, there was the group sounds, what they call the group sounds. People in those groups sang in Japanese, but the way they sang was basically in the style of kaiyokyoku. So it was sort of more in a style that was already connected to what had gone before, whereas they were trying to go for, a style that was more influenced by the Western style of phrasing and rhythm. So yeah, at the time, the prevailing view was that you should sing in English because somehow Japanese just couldn't go with this sort of rock folk that was happening at the time. And Happy End was really the band that changed all that. And this song, Kaze Wo Atsumete, more than any other, and from this album, Kazemachi Roman, proved that you could put Japanese language to this new rock folk, and it could work really well. And this sort of reminds me of, you hear these debates all the time, like with hip-hop, or I sometimes hear people saying, you can't use an Australian accent, it just sounds a bit funny on hip-hop, or I don't know, any other accent like a Welsh or a South African couldn't possibly go with hip-hop. And I don't know, even things like opera. I've heard people talk about opera and say that by its nature, English just doesn't work with operatic singing. You've got to sing in French or Italian or German. These languages work, but not English. But I think this story of Kaze Wo Atsumete sort of proves that that's not the case, that you can put any language with any kind of style and make it work. You don't have to be ashamed of where you come from and how you speak. So it's often said that music is the universal language, and I guess Kazemachi Roman and Kaze Wo Atsumete proves that you can universally put different languages with different music, and it's okay. You don't have to bow your head in shame. And the song is also enduring, I think, because it's so particular in talking about images from Tokyo that it becomes universal, as in like any great works of art where they're very specific, they become relevant to anyone, because we can all identify with these feelings. Now, in this case, it's not specific to a real place, it's specific to a memory, to a fantastic sort of view, this dreamlike view of a memory, but there's still very specific things within that. So I think it translates, and that translates into the whole feel of the song and the dreamy nostalgia that also has an element of bittersweet to it. And it perfectly crystallizes that longing for the places that no longer are, and the people that no longer exist, and our memories of ourselves that can never be the selves that they were before. It's the sound of nostalgia, of the soundscape of the mind, and I guess it's the sound of wind as it blows through skyscrapers and the city. Okay, so I hope you've found that interesting. I've done a translation of the lyrics that I'm going to post. I'm going to do a version in English, version in Japanese. And if this is of interest, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.